In this video, we will talk about how to design an intervention. Let's first revisit this figure, which we discussed in the previous slides. In week 3, we covered physical activity surveillance to understand the prevalence of physical inactivity. We also discussed how to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions. In this video, we will focus on 2 key topics: the determinants of physical activity, how to design physical activity interventions. We will also briefly introduce the concept of implementation. Let's look at the determinants of physical activity. Understanding these determinants is important because they provide the theoretical foundation for designing effective intervention strategies. For example, research has shown that an individual's perceived capacity, often referred to as self-efficacy, is a key factor influencing participation in physical activity. Therefore, intervention programs should include strategies to enhance this sense of capacity. These may include educational sessions to increase knowledge, training opportunities to build skills. Ultimately, these strategies help individuals feel more confident in their ability to engage in physical activity. There are several models that provide guidance for thinking about the determinants of physical activity. The first model I would like to introduce is the social ecological model. You may or may not have heard of this model, but it is a widely used framework for guiding decision-making in the field of physical activity. Researchers suggest that the determinants of physical activity operate across multiple levels of influence, including the individual level, the interpersonal level, the organizational level, the policy level, and the cultural level. At the individual level, factors include age, gender, health status, ethnicity, motivation, and personal interests. At the interpersonal level, this involves interactions with others, such as social support from peers, family members, and communities. At the organizational or community level, factors include access to facilities and equipment, safety, availability, and cost. At the policy level, this refers to formal plans, rules, or guidelines adopted by governments or organizations to guide behavior and decision-making. For example, the 2018 Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans represent a national-level effort to promote physical activity across the population. Finally, at the cultural level, this includes broader social norms, values, and beliefs, such as attitudes towards sports and physical activity. These factors can be more difficult to change because they are deeply embedded within society. Overall, the social ecological model provides a comprehensive framework for understanding the determinants of physical activity from multiple perspectives, not only at the individual level, but also across broader social and environmental contexts. Now let's shift to social cognitive theory. In this theory, human behavior is explained through a dynamic and reciprocal model of causality, in which behavior, personal cognitive factors, and social environmental influences continuously interact. This concept is known as reciprocal determinism. Research based on social cognitive theory has shown that several key factors are significantly associated with increased engagement in physical activity, including social support, self-efficacy, outcome expectations, particularly negative outcome expectations, and self-regulation. What is self-efficacy? Let's take a closer look at this concept. As you can see, self-efficacy is one of the key components of social cognitive theory. It refers to an individual's belief in their ability to perform a specific behavior or take action in a given situation. The figure on the right comes from a review study that summarizes effective strategies for promoting physical activity. These strategies include providing general information about the consequences of behavior, setting goals, offering personalized information about the consequences of behavior for the individual. Other influential theories include the theory of planned behavior and self-determination theory. Similarly, these 2 theories place strong emphasis on the role of individual psychological factors in influencing physical activity behavior. The theory of planned behavior highlights the importance of behavioral intention as a key predictor of action. Self-determination theory focuses more on motivation, particularly intrinsic motivation, as a driver of behavior change. For example, within self-determination theory, strategies such as offering a variety of group fitness classes can enhance an individual's sense of autonomy. This increased autonomy is associated with greater motivation, which in turn makes individuals more likely to engage in physical activity. Now, thinking about other psychological needs, such as competence and relatedness, what types of strategies do you think could help improve these determinants? To summarize the determinants of physical activity, I've organized them based on the social ecological model. I hope this overview helps illustrate how complex it is to promote physical activity, given the multiple levels of influence involved. Now let's shift to designing interventions, building on our understanding of the determinants of physical activity. Here is a diagram that illustrates the thought process behind developing an intervention. First, we identify the key determinants of physical activity, as discussed in the previous slides. Next, we select appropriate behavior change techniques that target these specific determinants. Finally, we integrate these techniques to design and deliver the intervention. In many cases, These determinants are also referred to as the underlying mechanisms, as they help explain why an intervention is expected to work. First, I would like to introduce a comprehensive behavior change technique, taxonomy. This taxonomy organizes behavior change techniques into 16 clusters, such as scheduled consequences, rewards, and threats. I will not go into the detailed definitions of each element here, but rather provide a general overview. You will be using this taxonomy for your final project, so you will have the opportunity to explore it in more detail later. Within each cluster, multiple specific behavior change techniques are identified. For example, within the goals and planning cluster, there is a technique called goal setting. In a specific context, this technique might involve helping a client set weekly SMART goals based on their preferences, current physical activity level, and health status. In less structured settings, it may involve guiding clients to develop their own goals independently. I really like this guidebook because it clearly outlines which techniques can be used and how they can be applied in different contexts. Now let's look at how behavior change techniques are represented within different frameworks. First, consider the ABC framework, antecedents, behavior, and consequences, which emphasizes the role of external factors rather than internal factors in shaping behavior change. This framework highlights techniques related to antecedents and consequences, both of which correspond to clusters within the behavior change techniques taxonomy. For antecedents, strategies may include restructuring the physical environment. For example, placing running shoes by the door as a cue or reminder to go jogging or walking. For consequences, strategies may include providing information about the health benefits of engaging in physical activity or reinforcing behavior through positive feedback. Next, let's look at the trans-theoretical model. This model describes how individuals move through different stages when changing a behavior. The strategies used to facilitate this change are typically categorized into cognitive processes and behavioral processes. Many of these strategies are also reflected in the comprehensive behavior change technique taxonomy we discussed earlier. I don't want to overburden you with too many details about each framework, but I do want to emphasize that these models serve as valuable guides for decision-making. If you aim to design theory-driven behavior change interventions, these frameworks are excellent tools to support your process. They can help make your intervention design more systematic, robust, and persuasive. Now let's shift to looking at some successful interventions for promoting physical activity. These examples are primarily drawn from the work of Gregory J. Welk, a leading researcher in physical activity promotion. In this work, intervention approaches are categorized into three main types: campaign and informational approaches, behavioral and social approaches, and policy and environmental approaches. The first type is campaign and informational approaches. Programs using this approach include the Stanford Heart Disease Prevention Program and the Wheeling Walks Intervention. These campaigns typically involve large-scale, high-intensity, and highly visible efforts. They often use mass media, such as television, radio, newspapers, and other communication channels, to raise awareness, deliver targeted health messages to specific population segments, and reinforce behavior change. These strategies are usually multi-component, multi-sector, and multi-site interventions, often targeting specific populations within communities in middle to high-income countries. However, evidence from systematic reviews suggests that the effectiveness of community-wide interventions can be inconsistent, particularly in low to middle-income settings or when high-quality evidence is limited. That said, mass media campaigns can still be effective, especially when they are integrated with community-based programs. Another approach within this category involves delivering short informational and motivational messages, often through digital platforms. For example, some studies have used mobile phones to send prompts that encourage individuals to follow their physical activity plans. These messages are typically brief and direct, such as, "Even small steps count. You are on your way toward your goal." In addition to motivational messages, some interventions use reminder prompts, such as encouraging individuals to stand up from their desks or take the stairs instead of the elevator. Another groups of interventions are behavior and social approaches. One of the type are programs tailored to a person's specific interests or readiness to make a change in physical activity habits. By teaching behavioral skills such as goal setting, building social support, self-rewards, problem-solving, and relapse prevention, the programs help people learn to incorporate physical activity into their daily routines. Such programs can be delivered in group settings or by email, internet, mail, or telephone, or by all four means. This approach is cost-effective when compared with supervised physical activity programs. Social support in community settings is an example of a strategy that capitalizes on social networks to reinforce physical activity behavior. Behavioral and social approaches include creation of buddy systems, behavioral contracts between the participant and program leaders, and formation of walking or other physical activity support groups. For example, Kriska and colleagues organized women in Pittsburgh into walking clubs within their neighborhoods and sent communications, such as newsletters and phone prompts, designed to reinforce and sustain the walking networks. Similarly, Lombard and coworkers organized walking partners in small groups in communities in the state of Virginia. They provided initial training about walking and behavioral principles, neighborhood maps, and other supports. Phone networks and regular prompts and updates were used to reinforce behaviors and provide opportunities for participants to ask questions. For example, a well-known community-level support program is Active Living by Design, an initiative funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. This program was designed to help 25 communities create environments that support active living. Each funded site established a multidisciplinary community partnership and implemented the 5P strategies: preparation, promotion, programs, policy, and physical projects. These partnerships worked across neighborhoods, schools, work sites, and other local organizations to strengthen both physical and social supports for physical activity. The diagram illustrates how the initiative supports communities, how communities implement the 5P strategies, and the short-term and long-term outcomes they aim to achieve. Another promising approach is health coaching. In this approach, clients seek support in finding ways to take action and make behavior changes. For example, motivational interviewing-based health coaching can help individuals resolve ambivalence about change and guide them in setting specific, achievable goals. Health coaches differ from trainers who focus on teaching specific exercises. Instead, health coaches act as guides, helping individuals explore their own motivations and develop personalized strategies for change, rather than simply providing instructions. Another recommended strategy within the behavioral and social domain is school-based physical education. Many of you likely have experience with this approach, so I will not go into detail here. The final category involves policy and environmental approaches to promoting physical activity. At the environmental level, strategies may include increasing access to parks and recreational spaces, or reducing the cost of gym memberships in local communities. However, these types of changes are often difficult to achieve directly, especially for academic researchers. Our role is typically to generate evidence that demonstrates how these factors influence physical activity, which can then inform decision-making by policymakers. In many cases, meaningful changes to the physical environment require years or even decades of research to build a strong evidence base. Governments and institutions rely on this accumulated evidence to develop policies that support population-level health. For example, systematic reviews have examined differences in physical activity levels among people living in more walkable, activity-friendly environments, characterized by features such as safe street crossings, supportive topography, and continuous sidewalks, compared to those living in less supportive environments. These studies consistently find that individuals in activity-friendly environments tend to have higher levels of physical activity and lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Such findings provide important evidence that can guide local governments in making environmental and policy changes to promote physical activity. The last part relates to transportation and the built environment, such as expanding pathways and parks and improving the safety of biking infrastructure to encourage more people to use active transportation. As we discussed in Week 2, transportation-related physical activity tends to be lower in North America compared to many European and some Asian countries. One clear example comes from personal observation. In China, dedicated bike lanes are common on most streets, and many parks also include bicycle paths. In contrast, in places like Utah, this level of infrastructure is not always available. As a result, individuals may feel hesitant or concerned about safety when considering active commuting, even if they live close to school or work. This highlights how environmental design can strongly influence people's willingness to engage in physical activity, particularly through active transportation. Next, I would like to introduce some well-known global and national policies for promoting physical activity. This is a Global Action Plan on Physical Activity, 2018 to 2030, led by the World Health Organization. The WHO developed this global action plan to help countries scale up policy efforts to promote physical activity. It was created in response to requests from countries for updated guidance, and provides a framework of effective and feasible policy actions to increase physical activity at all levels. The plan outlines 4 strategic objectives and recommends 20 policy actions that can be applied across countries. These actions address multiple determinants of physical inactivity, including cultural, environmental, and individual factors. A key feature of this plan is its emphasis on a systems-based approach. Effective implementation requires strong leadership, as well as collaboration across governments and multiple sectors, to achieve a coordinated, whole-of-system response. Through partnerships, the WHO supports countries in implementing a whole-of-community approach, aiming to increase physical activity among people of all ages and abilities. It also strengthens global, regional, and national capacity by providing technical support, innovation, and guidance. At this point, you can likely see the difference between physical activity, epidemiology, and fields like exercise science or clinical treatments. Work in this area often requires large-scale collaboration, coordination across sectors, and substantial funding to achieve population-level impacts. Another action plan was developed in the United States, the National Physical Activity Plan. This plan is a comprehensive set of policies, programs, and initiatives designed to increase physical activity across all segments of the U.S. population. Its goal is to foster a national culture that supports physically active lifestyles. The ultimate purpose is to improve health, prevent disease and disability, and enhance quality of life. If you are interested, I encourage you to explore the plan in more detail using the provided link. The final emerging approach involves digital technologies, particularly the growing use of artificial intelligence. Traditionally, wearable technologies have been widely used as intervention tools. As we discussed in the physical activity measurement section, wearable activity trackers are often used to measure physical activity and provide accurate feedback. From an intervention perspective, these devices can also support behavior change by facilitating self-monitoring, which is a key behavior change technique. Another rapidly developing tool is the use of chatbots. Researchers are now developing chatbot systems powered by large language models to function similarly to human health coaches. These chatbots can provide guidance, motivation, and personalized feedback to support behavior change. However, it is important to note that this area is still emerging. The current evidence base is limited, and there are not yet enough high-quality studies, such as randomized controlled trials, to fully establish their effectiveness. To summarize, evidence-based interventions for promoting physical activity can be categorized into three main types: campaign and informational approaches, behavioral and social approaches, policy and environmental approaches. In addition to these well-established strategies, technology-based interventions have become increasingly popular in recent years. However, more high-quality evidence is still needed to fully evaluate the effectiveness of digital technologies in promoting physical activity. There are also additional evidence-based intervention resources available for your reference. Now let's return to this diagram and revisit the process of designing interventions. After developing an intervention, we need to evaluate whether it is effective. The gold standard for answering this question is a randomized controlled trial, which compares changes in physical activity between those who receive the intervention and those who do not. Once an intervention has been shown to be effective, the next step is to implement it in broader, real-world settings. At the implementation stage, the key questions shift. Instead of focusing primarily on whether the intervention works, we ask questions such as, does the program reach the populations who need it most? How can we increase awareness and participation? Is the program being delivered as intended across different settings? In addition to these considerations, we still care about outcomes. We continue to evaluate changes in physical activity during implementation to determine whether the program achieves similar effects across different sites. This helps us assess the generalizability of the intervention. Here is a diagram that summarizes the concepts we discussed. During the intervention stage, the primary focus is on evaluating efficacy, that is, determining whether the program works under controlled conditions. In contrast, during the implementation stage, the focus shifts to understanding how to make the program work effectively in real-world settings and across different contexts. Here's a framework that summarizes the outcomes of interest during the implementation stage. It includes reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance. First, we consider reach, whether the program successfully reaches the target population. Second, we evaluate effectiveness, which refers to whether the intervention produces the expected benefits in real-world settings, as we discussed earlier. Third, adoption focuses on participation and engagement. Even if the program is disseminated successfully, individuals may choose not to participate due to barriers such as time constraints, limited awareness of benefits, or cost. Therefore, strategies to improve engagement are critical at this stage. Fourth, implementation refers to the fidelity of program delivery, whether the intervention is delivered as intended according to the original design. Finally, maintenance examines whether participants continue engaging with the program over time, rather than dropping out after a short period. While each of these outcomes requires specific strategies to optimize, this can become quite complex. We will not cover those details in this class, but I will provide additional resources if you are interested in learning more.